In a world without digital solutions, it would take me more time to learn something because the internet now offers you ability to access information at the click of a button.
I probably wouldn't be able to do a lot of the work that I do.
Without digital, it's so difficult. It would take so long before we could have spoken to each other.
Many people are going to find it so hard to get payments if there was no digital technologies.
I would just lose so much access to information and so much efficiency without digital solutions. With the right policies and investments in digital, we can
Boost economic growth,
Creates billions of jobs.
improve health services,
use data to increase agricultural productivity,
Supercharge e-commerce.
expand education to remote areas,
It's time to bridge
the digital
divide.
Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ajay, as everyone here in this room and probably watching us on the live stream is well aware, you have been very clear in your plans to transform the World Bank Group to be a better fit for the complex problems that the world's facing today. How does digital help you accomplish that mission?
So first of all, Stephanie, thank you for doing this. And Hans, thank you for your many years of friendship. Hans is a outstanding and thoughtful contributor, not only to how he runs his company, but to the entire space of technology and digital. And he cares deeply. So there's a reason why I have had an old partnership with him. And you will see it when he gets to speak just now. Back to what Steph was asking about, which is to do with a vision of the World Bank and knowledge and digital. So, Stephanie, we are trying to get the bank to be fit for purpose for the next 30, 40 years. We have an 80-year legacy. We do an outstanding job. We have wonderful people who live in the most difficult circumstances with their families, bring subject matter expert to work, bring change. Last year, we put 120 billion to work across all our different parts of the institution. They are focused on everything from education to healthcare to infrastructure to whatever the causes in the world. We have expanded our vision to include livable planet, not just the eradication of poverty. Livable planet in climate change, pandemics, fragility, conflict, violence, food insecurity, all that. Now, in that context, what we're trying to do is to look at our knowledge as important as our money. So people think of us sometimes as a money bank, but when you go to our clients in the countries that receive input from us, yes, we're a money bank, but we're also a knowledge bank. And the knowledge bank part of us, we want to think of it in 5 verticals. And the first one is people, which is human capital, health and education and social benefit schemes, stuff that we've worked on together.
Yeah.
The second one is prosperity, jobs, domestic resource mobilization, financial inclusion, policies, economic policies, that kind of stuff. The third is planet. That's mitigation, adaptation, food insecurity, water, forestry, biodiversity loss, soil degradation, that. The fifth one is infrastructure. In fact, this is the guy who runs infrastructure, sitting right here. And that's the guy who runs the knowledge bank. They're all sitting here. So infrastructure is the more traditional one, bridges, airports, ports, roads. But the fifth one is digital. And the reason why we want to make a vertical of digital and not let it be submerged in the others is because it enables all the others. And the pace of change in digital is amazing. And if we don't create the focus on it, we will have challenges. At the end of the day, these general purpose technologies of the past that have taken years, whether it be the steam engine or or electricity or the internet, they took differential years to impact the world. I think the way digital is growing right now under the AI, it'll be a shorter time frame. The bank needs to be focused for that. So I think of digital as the breakthrough technology that takes out the arbitrage of the incumbent and enables new ways to reach populations without the traditional challenge of the expense of reaching them for healthcare, for education, for everything. We can get through that by breaking through the arbitrage of incumbency. And that's the value of digital in that sense. Then there's one other aspect of it, and then I'll shut up and move on to the next one. And that is, I don't mean digital only as financial inclusion or things for consumers, health and education, important. I do mean it for governance. I think that if governments embrace digital, they create transparency, they create clean governance, they create citizen engagement. And I think that is a very important part of digital that we are keen to be a part of. And then, of course, there's the whole AI and data and how we work with that also inside this vertical. So this is going to be an important vertical for our bank for the next decades to come.
Before we get to the digital divide, which is something that both people on this stage are working very hard to address, Ajay, I first want to ask you, how do you prioritize digital at a time when, as you pointed out in a session that we did together in Davos a few months ago, there are still 600 million people without electricity in Africa alone?
Yeah, so yes, 600 million people in Africa alone do not have power, not at all. I mean, when you fly over the continent, you will see dark patches, not because there aren't people, it's because they're living the way their ancestors used to live. And I think that's absolutely unacceptable, and it's an issue of human rights. I consider to be as fundamental a human right as the right to breathe. And so we have to give them access to electricity. But remember that at the same time, 1/3 of the people in the world don't have access to the internet. And the 1/3 of the people in the world are 2+ billion. And here it's 600 million. Some overlap, obviously, because if you don't have power, there's no way to access Hans's capabilities. But even if you have power, clearly there's 1.5 billion people who still don't have access to the internet. And of course, that gets exacerbated when you start talking gender. And age. So this gets a little crazier, and Hans is the expert on these kinds of numbers. But to me, therefore, there's no trade-off. The reality is we have to get those 600 million people connected to electricity. The bank has made a commitment to reach 100 million by 2030. We're in the process of seeking to expand that ambition to another 100 million. If we can do that with renewable energy, by the way, we've tried it out in Rwanda and Tanzania. We know it can work. Now we have to generate not just money from IDA, which is a huge part of our bank, but also from governments themselves, and most importantly, from the private sector. It's kind of a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 participation in this effort. I think of that as being the base load for building digital on. Meanwhile, there's the other 1.5 billion of people who have access to electricity, don't have digital. We have work to do with them too. And then there's the others who do have access to the internet, but it's not being fully used and exploited for the capabilities that it is possible to do. So there's different shades of work to be done with different target audiences.
Yeah. Hans, let me bring you into this conversation. You have been making great strides in bridging the digital divide. At home through your work with Verizon and internationally through your work with Edison Alliance. What works? What works in helping bridge the digital divide?
First of all, thank you for having me, and Ajay, I'm applauding you. I understand all the challenge you have. I, of course, for many reasons, have said that digital inclusion is extremely important. I think the 21st century's infrastructure is mobility, broadband, and cloud. And I don't think it should matter where you're born, where you come from, and who you are, that you should be part of our society. And today, to be part of our society, you actually need to be digitally included. I've been fighting for goal 18 for the SDGs for a long time. I gave it up, as many know, it's only 17. My work, both as Verizon, but also globally, has always been trying to see that we find the opportunities to take down the barriers, because there are very different barriers in different worlds. And let me give you some numbers. So today, roughly 5.3 billion people are connected to the internet. 2.6 billion are not connected. Of the 2.6 billion, I would say 85–90% of actually covered by broadband, some kind of broadband. And people looks at me, that cannot be true. It's actually true. And then you start dividing where are the barriers, and the barriers are three. Accessibility to technology. Yes, there are probably 500 million people or 400 million that actually outside the telecom grid. Affordability is one of the biggest barriers of all, meaning afford a device, afford a service plan. That's sometimes a staggering challenge. And finally, the usability, having application that is actually supporting the society, meaning education, digital healthcare, financial inclusion, being part of the societal opportunities that the government gives you, and being able to work. And it's different in every country. I mean, as we heard, electricity could be in one country, another country could be it's too expensive, there are no subsidized plans. I would say to 90–95% all infrastructure in the world is done by private money. The biggest challenge has actually been affordability and usability. Then you understand the challenge of it. It's a multifaceted challenge. There is not one organization, one country, one NGO, one private company can do it, because ultimately, think about those three, accessibility, affordability, usability. It goes from a sort of grading from private sector, then you meet each other on affordability, and then usability, I would say in 95% of the countries in the world, healthcare, education, financial inclusion are done by the big institutions and governments. That's how it works. So in 2021, where I came out from the COVID, I said, now I'm going to do something big here. And actually try to rally a lot of people around how can we get more people connected. I actually rallied Mr. Ajay Banga to work with me, and ultimately I started the Edison Alliance to get...
That's the only reason the Edison Alliance made any progress.
And then we formed the Edison Alliance with one target. We wanted to connect 1 billion people in 5 years, but only if it's healthcare, education, or financial inclusion. We love to have Netflix on broadband, etc., but that's not what we're talking about. This is societal infrastructure. So we rallied. Today we are some 150 champions, 320 initiatives, 130 countries, and we have achieved 784 million people more connected in less than 2.5 years. And we're very close to get to 1 billion. But it is a community of work. And that's what we're doing. And of course, Verizon is doing its part. We're basically doing the majority of private education in this country. We've dedicated $3 billion to digital inclusion in the US. But ultimately, everyone can do something, but you need to come together as a community. So Ajay was leading the part of the financial inclusion. His successor at Mastercard is doing that today. So it's much about NGOs, countries, private sector together doing it. Very different challenge in every market, but God, this is so important for society.
Steph, two things struck me on the Edison Alliance when the first meeting we had, he laid out two things, which he probably doesn't recall today, but they were facts. The first one was 1/3 of people don't have access to the internet. Actually, at that time, it was a little higher.
It was a little higher.
But what shook me was that only 1/3 of people in the least developed countries have access at all. So the same 1/3, depending on which prism you look at it from, is actually quite a scary number. Only 1/3 of people in the least developed countries have access, while globally, 1/3 do not have access. That's a very different 1/3. And it tells you about the digital divide, which actually surprised me. I didn't know that number. And the second part that he told me, which made a lot of sense to me, which I again did not know, was that only 500–600 million people at that time, now 400, were away from broadband infrastructure. I thought it was all about investment in broadband. And he explained to me that's actually not the case. It's actually affordability and accessibility, and then making the usability happen. This was our first meeting. And that's when I started figuring out that this was such an opportunity within our grasp. We have to double down on it, which is what he's trying to do.
Ajay, when you talk to world leaders about these issues, and again, coming back to what I asked you earlier, when there are so many other intractable problems, many of which World Bank is working to solve, do you need to make the case for digital inclusion? Do you need to make the case for bridging the digital divide? And if so, what's the argument?
On both digital and climate, the world has moved very far from 5–7 years ago, when a lot of leaders, if you told them about any of these, they would say, but I need to build my schools and I need to build my healthcare clinics. That is not the case. Most leaders today are quite enlightened on the power of digital to break through. So I can step back for a minute, something that Hans and I have talked about. I think of the challenges we face in the world on three sides of a triangle. One side of the triangle is the challenge of inequality, which is the one versus many trade-off. More and more, it's become I win, you lose, as compared to we can all grow together. And I think that one versus many, it shows up in gender inequality, in religious inequality, in ethnic inequality, in sexual orientation, in just having the bad luck to be born on the wrong side of the tracks kind of inequality, which is what Hans was saying when he said very quickly at the beginning, it shouldn't matter where you were born or what you look like to get access. That is all how inequality shows up. It could show up in healthcare and education and financial access, but that's what it is. The second side of the triangle is the trade-off between humanity and nature, which now people are quite engaged on. The whole climate issue, forestry issue, biodiversity issue, the fact that for us to grow, we seem to have to destroy what we have. And that is a second side of the triangle. But the third side, which allows the two sides to not fall down under their own weight. This guy's an engineer. He will tell you that they will fall down. The reason they don't fall down is because the bottom is the hardest one to beat. And that's the trade-off between long-term and short-term. These are long-term problems. They need long-term money. The problem is most people, CEOs, are under, politicians are under pressure every quarter, are under pressure every 6 months, are under pressure every year or every 2-year cycle for elections or every 4-year cycle. But doing the right thing on building an underground train system to alleviate traffic and therefore, things to do with pollution is not a 2 and 3 and 4 year exercise for a politician. For him to stand up in front of his investors and say, I believe I am putting these resources for the right reason because they will pay back my company because of greater connectivity and data use and will make my company even more valuable to future generations. It's not easy. Ask him. He does it every day. It wasn't easy for me in my financial inclusion time. So the problem of short-term versus long-term is the biggest issue. What is the two things that allow us to break through? One is technology and digital. It breaks through all this. All this. And the second is a sense of crisis. So a sense of crisis is your best friend. Never let a crisis go waste. A sense of crisis is your best friend in getting people to agree to tackle this triangle along with the enabling tool of technology. And the biggest headroom is geopolitics and fractionalizing of the global order. That's why I believe in digital for us. That's why I believe that there is no trade-off. Leaders see the triangle in their own words, in their own way that suits their country. They see digital as the enabler. They feel the crisis if they're in the emerging markets. They worry about geopolitics, and they're really keen to move on. So this is not now a question of, hey, we should do this. Their biggest hunger is, tell us the best way to do it. Help us do it. Make it easier for us. Bring us the knowledge. Give us the money. Give us the capability. Bring the private sector. That's what they're talking about.
Hans, how do we incentivize more members of the private sector to tackle the issue? Why isn't everyone a member of the Edison Alliance?
First of all, we decided to make it very narrow because we want to succeed with the target to get 1 billion people connected in these verticals. And as Ajay say, what I'm doing, I'm building sort of the foundation. Broadband is great, but broadband or connectivity is only good when you use it for something good, meaning digital healthcare, education, financial inclusion. There are other industries later on that we might tackle, but this has been it. So I think it comes back to what Ajay says. If it's part of your strategy, then it becomes very natural. And my strategy is that it's very clear. I want to connect as many people as possible to my network. So being part of that and doing it for a greater good, it's just more business and having more people. The example of Planet, I mean, we have infrastructure in the United States in every zip code. There's not green energy in many of those zip codes. So what do? I do green bonds. I'm on my 6th green bond. I admitted it yesterday. I'm on $6 billion in green bond, the biggest private investors in green bonds. Because why? because my cost is going down with green bond. I adding that. The bonds are cheaper than my normal debt. So it's a good business, but it's also doing the right thing for our society.
Tell them how much demand you had for the last green
So for the last billion I had last week, I had demand of 7 billion. So the green bond market is not dead. So clearly, but again, it's part of our strategy. It's not any philanthropy I'm doing.
But he's also very disciplined. He measures exactly where that money is going.
Yes.
He's transparent about it. He shows it to people. He's not scared of discussing it. And if you're an investor, you know you're going to get paid from Verizon.
Yeah.
So this is the sweet spot of green bonds, a place like Verizon.
Yeah. And every project we know exactly if it's wind farms in Austin, whatever. So that's what we're doing. So we've exhausted 5 billion, and we're on we just emitted 6. But I come back to there are many people working in digital inclusion, and I applaud it. But you need to find your niche where your business is there as a private sector, how you can work with governments, how you can work with NGOs, and actually make something bigger. Ultimately, it has to resonate with your strategy as a company and your stakeholders and your shareholders.
What stakeholders, as you look at the broader digital divide issue, are being excluded from the conversation? Who needs to be brought in?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
On the digital inclusion, it's very different. I would say you find countries where the government needs to be much more active using the infrastructure to get all their citizens being part of the system. There are countries where it's an overemphasis of building the infrastructure, where it's more important doing subsidies for low-income families, for the device and for the service fee. So it's very different in different countries, and that's why we have Edison Alliance, we have Lighthouse countries that are sharing the best practice for their countries. So if I had one solution, it's only NGOs or countries, I would say it, but it's very different from country to country, and it has to be a different solution. But we have the common goal that it shouldn't matter where you're born or where you come from or who you are, that you should be part of our digital society and all the benefits that some of us had when we were born.
I will say that the one I've found over the years that foundational principles help. And Hans, before he came to Verizon, I used to joke that he was a hardware guy. He used to run a small company called Ericsson for many years, and that's how I first met him.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I think providing infrastructure is a core element, but on top of that, creating a digital identity platform for citizenry is kind of foundational. And I believe your government should be the owner of your digital ID.
Yes,
he and I
absolutely,
both agree.
100% aligned.
Private companies should not own that. It is the social contract of a citizen with their country to have an identity, a currency, and safety. You should not take that away from them. They should have the digital identity. That digital identity should guarantee the privacy of that citizen. It should help them with their security, but the government should give the identity.
Yeah.
Once you do that, then connecting them to the infrastructure that a private company, whether Ericsson or Verizon or combinations of them, in fact, mostly it's a combination, can build, then the question is, what do you do with it? That requires that digital ID so you can start connecting with that citizen. Now, the question is, when you connect with that citizen, you must ensure that governments guarantee the privacy of that citizen. Because if you don't do that, you will run into trouble with the acceptance of the idea. So if you want this to be embraced around the world, yes, get the infrastructure, get a digital ID. That's what we used to talk about even earlier.
Yeah.
Get that going and then move from there.
Yeah, and based on that, you can be financially included, you can get the credit,
insurance,
you can
healthcare, education.
Insurance, you can start a business. Everything is built on it.
SME credit, everything flows from there.
Yeah, and that's so important. Sometimes we miss that moment, how important it is. The infrastructure that we talk about, getting broadband in the hands of people, yeah, it's great. But it's actually to have everything around it if we're thinking about the societal challenge we have today. And that's what I'm trying to advocate for all the time, that it's a matter of what you're doing with it and not only having broadband and you say, hey, let's build broadband, it's going to be great. Of course, I like that. I mean, that's my business. But it's how do you do it? How do you connect with your citizens of your country? How do you give them a digital identity? How do you get the bank account? How do you get digital education? I mean, we know with the population growth in certain parts of this planet, they will never be able to build a school in brick and mortar. They will not have doctors enough close by. So they need to find new solutions. If not, we just separate the world even more. The divide is getting bigger. And we're 2.6 billion still not connected. We have a goal of 1 billion. Hopefully we'll cross that sooner or later this year, and then we're going to see what we're going to do next. Because then it's going to still be...
This thing about the divide, we haven't talked about AI, and I'm assuming you're getting there.
Yeah.
But the AI has all the benefits we talk about. Now just look at one, and I'm not talking about risks in terms of, weaponization, all that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the divide. So what do you need to do to use AI? Right now, businesses in the developed world are all embracing AI. Forget about Verizon. They actually understand what they're talking about in AI.
Thank you.
Even people who are relatively naive about AI are rushing towards it because of the fear of being left behind.
Yeah.
FOMO is pushing them towards it. But when you go to the developing world, people don't have access to the internet. Forget about AI in businesses. And so that divide is going to grow if they're not careful. Second, what do you need to be able to do AI? You need good data, as in clean data, stored in the best way, so access to it for the AI engine is simplified. Second, you need lots of computing power. Third, you need lots of electricity, back to my earlier starting point, to run the computing power. Fourth, you need people who understand how to use that data to create algorithms that can then be used to create the hypotheses that in turn generate the result from that AI system. If you think of the developed world and some of the larger middle market countries, they have begun to cross this point. But the developing world is well behind on all these attributes. If this technology is going to move in 10 years, what the steam engine did in 100 and what the internet did in 30, then we don't have 30 years to solve this problem. That's the sense of crisis that I'm trying to bring into what I talk about. I think time is not our friend in this topic.
I agree.
Yeah. And we will have a robust conversation about artificial intelligence and all the constituencies that need to come to the table immediately following this one. In our few minutes remaining, Hans, I'll start with you, and then I'll ask Ajay the same question. Here at the Global Digital Summit 2030, how will we know if the bets that we've talked about today have paid off?
It's fairly easy to measure in my case, because we're going to measure that people are connected, and we're going to measure that they are not only being connected, they're actually using it by digital education, healthcare, or financial inclusion, and that should bring prosperity. That's how we're going to measure it. I think we're going to be in a way better place. I mean, sometimes when you look backwards, I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, it was only 1/3 of the world's population that was connected to the internet. So it's going pretty fast. But as Ajay is saying, it's a lot of other things happening in countries like in US, Western Europe, when it comes to AI. So if we don't have the fundamental infrastructure in the rest of the world, it's going to separate again. So it's very important that we continue. There's still going to be, I think, a portion of our population that's going to be outside the grid because they choose to be outside. They don't want to be part of it, and that's fine. But for anybody who wants to be part of the digital inclusion, digital society, we should provide for that. And hopefully when we sit there 2030, everyone that wants to be part of our digital society, they should be part of it and have access to the most fundamental services that a citizen, a person on this planet should have. And that's my goal, way above my daily work at Verizon. But if there's something I want to give back to my society, what is given to me is that. And then how far I will be, I don't know. Hopefully, Ajay will invite me back 2030 and I can talk about it.
Ajay?
I may have retired by 2030.
Oh, okay.
I have a 5-year term, and it depends whether I do another one. But as all the jokes aside, we have a corporate scorecard of 150 items right now, and we're trying to bring it down to 23, of which 2 will be focused on digital. Those are more in the category that he's talking about. I call it output measurement, not just input, but output is how many are connected, what kind of skills, jobs, blah, blah, we're doing. What I would like to get to after that is what the impact of that is in terms of outcomes.
Exactly.
So do we close the gender gap in digital in the process? Like, for example, about what is it, Hans, 12, 13%
Yep.
is the gap globally
Yep.
between genders, but
Yep.
in the developing world, it's 1/3.
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly?
Yeah, roughly, this number is right.
Roughly.
It's clearly skewed to male when it's really tough markets. It's way higher digital inclusion for males than females.
Okay, so this is my encyclopedia, by the way. He has this data somewhere in his head. So that gap has to close, but more importantly, what has to close is what it does to their lives. So the quality of education they get, the quality of job they get as a result, do they get access to opening more businesses? Do they get access to more credit for their business because all this happens? That's the outcome measurement. I don't think we'll be there in 2030, but I think we can get the output going, and then we have to get outcomes going in the coming years after that.
Ajay, Hans, thank you so much for this conversation this morning, and thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.